Hello, brothers and sisters of light and dark. Welcome to my page. My page is about common sense. I tried to keep it down and in the nitty gritty under 10 minutes. If it goes over 10 minutes, there's something very, very, very important and not important that liberals, libertards, people like to smoke, people like to drink, people like ayahuasca, people like DMT. Listeners' discretion is advised. Listeners' discretion is advised. Now, this video is going to be pertaining about vaccinations, so I won't get a hate strike, okay, or anything like that. I'm just going to retitle it the same way, pro-vaccine versus anti-vaccine. Here's your answer, and I said, and from my perspective, I believe people should go the holistic approach, not the medical approach, because if it becomes enforced, that can be a huge problem for those individuals who want to live naturally and those who may save themselves from becoming a risk factor. So let's get on with the video, and I'm going to begin the video, and I'm going to talk after a certain amount of certain words has been said. So let's begin the video. All right, let's use common sense now here, peoples, and let's make a solution at the very end, what the decision should be. All right.
I wish there was just more compassion. No, we don't want to make something difficult. We just want to be acknowledged. My daughter was a victim, and she's being punished.
Let's watch it.
Hi, my name is Marissa Gold. I am a parent. I have 2 girls.
And please understand that I'm doing this legally. So if I'm showing someone else's video, I'm just response video. I have a right to do this, so do not strike this. So YouTube or anybody else want to say something, so shall be it. I'm allowed to do this because I've seen other people do it, so I'm doing it as well. So you can see their information, Jubilee. This video is not monetized like their videos, okay? All right, I'm not trying to make any, you can see what they're doing and yada, yada, yada. That's all I'm doing for educational purposes. All right, here we go.
And 13, and I'm also a parenting expert with my own parenting company, Intuit Parenting.
My name is David Epstein, and I'm a pediatric intensive care physician.
I'm Gary Schliffer. I'm an internal medicine physician.
I'm Bob Sears. I'm a pediatrician. I guess my greatest passion is just to help encourage full, complete, informed consent for vaccinations.
I'm also Marissa. By trade, I am a designer. I am also an activist and a mother.
I'm Melissa Floyd, and I would consider myself an informed consent advocate. I just want to make sure this conversation can be open for people and continue to inform people and to listen to everyone, understand why we each come to our opinion on this.
The first statement is, I am vaccinated.
So I actually wasn't fully vaccinated, interestingly. I grew up with 2 parents that were into alternative medicine. So I was not vaccinated as a child, but as I got older, I vaccinated myself.
Well, I was vaccinated as a child, but my last vaccine was about 15 years ago when I returned to college, and I had a severe reaction in that I became arthritic in my hands, went to many, many doctors, and nobody knew what was going on and why it was happening, and just shrugged, like, it doesn't make sense. You're too young to have arthritis. And it wasn't until having kids and sort of digging into my own research for them that a lot of answers started coming up. And I think it's unfortunate that a lot of it is overlooked.
For me, I'll continue to get vaccinated regardless of the risks, because I've seen too many things on the other side. I've seen kids.
You see what he just said. He's actually focusing on the media, okay? Externalism. Remember, pro-vaccine, externalism, basic information of media news coverage. He just said why he got vaccinated.
Come into the ICU and die from only getting the flu. I've always felt like the risks are far outweighed by the benefits of getting the protection.
Not getting.
So in other words, he doesn't even know any other knowledge to protect himself from getting sick. Instead, he chose to get vaccinated. And so keep it simple, okay?
Vaccinated endangers other people.
I will acknowledge, of course, as a pediatrician, I know vaccines work. I know they give you protection. They vary greatly in what that protection is. It's not like 100% magical shield over you completely. But I do acknowledge there are some vaccines like the measles vaccine and the chickenpox vaccine that honestly, if you don't get those vaccines, yeah, you do risk catching the disease and passing it to others.
It's such a complicated topic, vaccines, and you're starting to get micro with each individual vaccine. And definitely the question was talking about the big picture. And I think, yeah, if you get micro, probably some of these vaccines.
I think when you're giving kids medication, you have to get micro about it. I don't think it's doing your kids any service to just say vaccines are all made the same and they're all safe and healthy and good for you. That every
Beautifully said.
Everybody's benefiting from it, because that's false. It's
But we
not
study
true.
them before we release them to the public. We study them, so we do know they're safe. That's the thing, is we
Safe-ish.
Well,
They're
safe.
See, the key word here is not for everybody. They already did their human guinea pig experiments on a certain amount of individuals through a ratio differentiates. And so collateral damage must take into account, which I say, okay, it's not a really good thing, but then it has to be done. Let's continue.
Being an intensivist, I see the worst of the worst. And so seeing the other side of kids who don't get vaccinated, I saw a kid walk in with meningococcemia, which I haven't seen in decades. He had all 4 limbs cut off. They had to be amputated because it was all dead tissue. You forget how bad things were before we had vaccines.
I didn't step forward for that because I don't like the assumption that if a child is unvaccinated, somehow they are of risk to everyone. And also knowing that vaccinated individuals can also be carrying and spreading diseases, I think it's very polarizing to say.
Exactly. That's another thing, too. Nobody really talks about the holistic approach of curing all these viruses or bacteria. Nobody's talking about it. As a matter of fact, I was doing some research and I found out there was an era in time, I think back in the 1940s, when this black man said, no, it's a part of my freedom of choice to not be vaccinated because that's not my choice to go. And I think it should stay like that, because once it's being forced, then we all are human guinea pigs and we'll become a communist economy. And you don't want that shit. You don't want a communist economy when things are forced against your own will. And then the government is not going to be responsible. Okay, there's no incentive to get a vaccine. There's only a health risk, even how small it is. I don't take chances with my health. That's the number one thing of myself, okay? And on top of that, the government's not responsible. So they're not going to pay you any handouts or anything if you do happen to get autism or actually arthritis. Let's continue.
Separate the two as if you're vaccinated, you're totally fine. You're not risking anybody anything. Unvaccinated children don't just have diseases hanging out in their bodies waiting to unload at any moment. Anybody could be spreading diseases, especially things like polio and pertussis that are not completely covered by the vaccine.
I'd do anything to keep my child safe.
Yes, very important.
I agree. I don't have kids, but when I think about it, the idea with vaccines is you're protecting all of us. You're protecting the group. There's this idea of herd immunity. And so I think that's why it's really important to talk about, because this is an issue that doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone around you. Because there's people that aren't vaccinated that are sick or have immune issues, or they're too young.
And think about this. All these diseases and shit doesn't happen in Africa. They're experimenting on people in Africa. And a lot of people don't really realize this, but I did some research and digging around, and I'm like, wait a minute. They take these vaccines, white and European. Most of the time, European have the most major diseases. You have to understand that it's 2 different races and different other things that's going on in about life. Sometimes they could use it as a weapon, a bioengineered weapon, but they're not going to talk about it here. But let's continue on here.
Get a vaccine, and they count on herd immunity.
I think most people too, I started out vaccinating my daughter because I believed all the same things that you said. It wasn't until she had a reaction and several reactions that I actually had to look at it differently, where I realized by continuing vaccinating for her, that actually would hurt her. And yet everyone wants me to do it for the population, as if I'm supposed to continue to sacrifice my child for everyone else.
Well, there are medical.
Listen to this, man. This is the thing. They are not responsible. And that's a really big downfall. I'm like, are you going to give me a shot? And what happens if something happens to me? You have to sign away your soul right there. You're signing away. You're signing away yourself when this happens. And I do not recommend to do that, because if they're not responsible, you're just a human guinea pig for free. God damn it. Do you want to be a human guinea pig for free? Come on now. There's holistic approaches to all of this bullshit. Let's continue.
Exemptions for vaccines. If your child has a reaction and there's concern, I think that's valid. But I think a larger population is using other justifications to not get the vaccines.
A number of families who look into vaccines.
So what you just basically said, forget your daughter. We're talking about the general population's opinion here, and we're not going to try to get too sentimental. Such a prick.
They will decide to opt out of vaccines because they feel they are just not willing to risk the side effects.
But the side effects are like 1 in a million, 1 in 2 million. Whereas the side effects from the diseases, when I see all these outbreaks and things like that, I'm going to choose vaccines every time.
And that's, I think, right there is the disservice to this conversation.
Yep, the service of the conversation, because you're just thinking about what you think and what they did in their research, and that, my friend, is a lack of information to find out other remedies rather than just only the one cure-all solution. And I hope it really doesn't happen, because I got to travel overseas. I'm a healthy person. I don't really believe in vaccines, even for my kids. But other than that, there's two types of people in the world: those who have a lot of fear and those who go the natural route. Let's continue.
It is a risk-benefit analysis, and what's unfortunate is how downplayed those risks are. I only started investigating vaccines because I ended up with a kid with an autoimmune disorder. So what does that mean? And instead of finding answers, I found more questions. The 1 in a million is not a real number.
Right, it's really not.
And so the more that is put out, and so people think that, no, it's not when you're talking about the different...
Yeah, they thinking about, okay, that's the collateral damage. Who cares about your child? Who cares about the side effect? This is the thing I don't really want to hear about, this forced vaccines, because I'm not taking it, okay? All right, let's continue.
Reactions.
I think the number you're referring to is anaphylactic shock. That anaphylactic shock is, of course, extremely rare. Whereas when you look at seizures from the MMR vaccine are 1 in 3,000.
But again, this creates fear in parents.
We worry that those on your side kind of downplay those.
So my daughter had seizures. Seizures for most people are considered kind of a big deal. When it happens to you, that downplayed element of, well, that's not anaphylactic shock, it's just a seizure. It is just a seizure. But seizures can be dangerous.
I don't think it's an idea of downplay. I think it comes back to what we were saying with the risk-benefit analysis. And I think the data is very clear that the benefits of giving vaccines by far outweigh the risks. So I don't think it's a question of downplaying the risks. They're there.
Sacrifices must be made.
But we also know that children were dying, and now they're not. And yes, there's side effects, but they're not as bad as what we had before vaccines.
I don't always trust my doctor's opinion.
Why is everybody walking forward? Oh.
Anytime anyone, whether it's a teacher, a friend, something I read online, my mom, the doctor, anytime anyone tells me, oh, you should do this, especially if it has to do with their health, I'm going to do research. And I would be careful about saying it's that I don't trust my doctor, but that trust has been developed over time. And so I would say in the early years when my children were very young, when they would say, this is what we recommend, yes, of course there were times where I got a second opinion or did the research on my own and asked the questions. And I think that as parents, we have to do that.
Well, it's hard to trust someone who sees your child for 10 minutes twice a year. In the end, parents know their children best. And that little office visit
Exactly.
where your pediatrician looks at your child, he does not know your child the way you know your child.
And as a matter of fact, sometimes you have these men who are doctors who didn't get new updated information. They're stuck in the Stonehenge where they do their profession, okay? Remember, when you graduate, you only keep about 50% of the knowledge you've been institutionalized, okay, naturally. But of course, because of human behavior, and how the human psychology is, understand this. If you know inside your heart, your intuition, I know people be saying, fuck your feelings, sacrifice a child. That's up to you. That's completely up to you. But I'm going to protect my child at all costs.
It's really hard for whatever recommendation he's making to be really based and individualized for your kid. So if you were to come to your doctor and say, hey, my child's acting differently after this well visit appointment, something's wrong, you want them to trust that you have an established relationship and listen to you and hear you and understand that as a mother, just because you don't have the DR in front of your name, it doesn't make your opinion somehow less valuable.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think like anyone, doctors are fallible and they don't know everything. And I think it's very important, like you were mentioning, to have a really strong doctor-patient relationship. I think that's really hard in today's 10-minute appointment age. You know, it makes it really difficult. But like as a young doctor, I think there's a lot of distrust when it comes to physician recommendations. It sucks because, you know, you spend decades training and learning, and your heart is in this place where you want to like be of service to people, and then you're not trusted.
And then
but,
you're not,
you know, to answer the question.
And then they're not responsible. That's the whole catch here. The government want to force inject you, and they are not responsible. Think about that. Centralization. You cannot have that. Okay.
And you shouldn't just blindly trust anyone's opinion, your doctor or anyone.
Ironically, the doctors are the ones that...
Well,
I trust my physicians. My daughter has epilepsy. And in March, she was also diagnosed with juvenile idiopathic arthritis. I went to the rheumatologist, and the rheumatologist said, I'm going to put her on methotrexate. And I looked at her, I'm like, methotrexate, that's a chemotherapeutic agent that, you know, kids with cancer get. And she's like, yes, but we use it in a low dose, and it doesn't cause harmful side effects. You have to trust me. I said, okay.
That's his decision.
And I trusted her. And I am so glad that I did. Before all this happened, she was a competitive gymnast.
Yeah,
and she used to walk up and down the stairs like she was 90 years old. She couldn't hold a pencil in her hand. Now she's back on the bars, back on the beam, doing things which my wife and I never thought that she would do again.
Trying to get emotional.
So yes, do I trust my physicians? Yeah. Yes. Do I question them? Yes, I will say, look, can we do this for her? Can we do this instead? And yes, you know, I can appreciate what you guys have said as far as people hearing you. And I think that's the biggest problem in medicine is that time is short. Clinicians aren't listening. And I think that as a pediatrician, you know, one of the most important jobs that we have is to listen to parents. And I think that if any pediatrician isn't doing that, they're not doing their job.
There is too much hostility between the two sides.
yeah, absolutely. I don't like it. I want us to be able to talk. I want us to be able to have relevant and educated conversations. And I think at the core of this conversation is what is at the core of humanity and being a parent, which is that we all want to do right by our children and we want to lead happy, healthy, and productive lives.
Yeah, I have no doubts in my mind of how I've come to my decision-making on the subject, which has been tedious and thorough, to say the least. I did not expect to go down this path in my life. But I have people who won't be friends with me, who I've had death threats on social media. I might not even be able to send my kids to school, depending on how legislation changes, because of the way I think. It's insane to me how hostile this has become, and it's not doing a service to research and science moving forward, and just the overall dialogues we have in our culture, or whatever the subject.
What I think is lacking in this debate or conversation is really compassion from the pro-vax side, or pro-mandate side, I'll say. Yeah. The people who refuse to acknowledge that vaccine reactions are happening, or that the things that happened to my daughter were connected because maybe it was just a coincidence and I just needed something to pin it on. You are socially isolated. You can be isolated by your family, isolated by the medical community, isolated by society as a whole because they assume you're unintelligent, uneducated, and irrational. I wish there was just more compassion.
And this is the thing I don't like about doctors and shit. I'm like, what about the natural? Nobody really talks about the holistic approach. And as I said before, this happened in the 1940s. Okay? There was this guy who was actually giving people education on how to protect themselves in a natural, holistic way. And it's that video's on the YouTube somewhere, and I can't find it. Okay, and this black man, he stood up against forced vaccines. Okay, It's very important to stand up against anything forced. It's not going to happen, okay? All right, here we go. Let's continue on.
Passion that no, we don't want to make something difficult. We just want to be acknowledged. My daughter was a victim, and she's being punished.
When I signed up for this, there was a little bit of trepidation coming into this because you do hear things in the media, about the people who are anti-vaccine and the way they respond to physicians.
You know what I say? When people use really big words, okay, they have this arrogance in their head. Like, okay, you should learn these words too. They enforce certain words that, you really don't need to say. There's other words to use in place. I don't even know what intrepidation means, okay? But there's people who like to use those words to feel intelligent or superior in some kind of way. There's basic and more easier to understand words that the general public can understand. But let's continue on here. But that's a side topic here.
And it is a little bit scary. As physicians, we care about people. There's compassion on the medical community side. We wouldn't do this if we didn't care. But again, I do have compassion for the families that have gone through issues with vaccines, and I have a great deal of compassion for the families that had children die from preventable diseases. There shouldn't be any hostility. There should be discussion. I mean, we can always question things. That's how we evolve. That's how we get better. If we didn't question anything, we'd be still in the dark ages.
And that's the end of that video. And I hope you understand that vaccines are not meant for everyone. The whole point here is that if you take a vaccine, even though there's a small chance that you can get hurt, you're being either forced or is it voluntary? Is your freedoms are going to be taken away because you do not take it? Okay, and I don't think it's ever going to happen, but people will be forced, as it did happen before. If you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. And you don't want people to be forced to do anything. These new passport vaccines, no, they're not going to be able to do that because there's countries out there who are basically not vaccinated and they're completely healthy. All right? And it's mostly, to me, it's more Caucasian, lighter-skinned individuals getting all these measles and smallpox and all that stuff like that. Before the invaders, the Native Americans was living healthy lives until the white man came over and gave them smallpox. And even infected them with blankets and shit. But other than that, that's beside the point here now. That's all I really wanted to say. And I hope you learned something here about holistic approach. Start doing some research on natural remedies, which most people are not really interested in for some strange hokey pokey reason. But instead, the media is using fear to entice fucking vaccines. Hope you learned something here. I love you all, but I hate the many of you. I love the animals, but do not fuck the animals. Because I'm not your average man. I'm not your Peter Pan. Peace.